The significance of stamps used on banknotes. Arnold Keller and John Sandrock. Note: this article was written by Dr. Arnold Keller of Berlin, Germany. From the earliest days of paper money collecting, Dr. Keller has been revered as the Dean of Paper Money Collectors. Over the years he had written many articles on the subject for German periodicals, and indeed, was the first to publish books for collectors on the subject. In the 1950s and 1960s, I had frequent occasion to correspond with Dr. Keller in my capacity as editor of the Currency Collector, the journal of the long-defunct World Paper Money Collectors Association. At that time I asked him if he would write an article for us, and this piece was the result. As you will see, he possessed an amazing in-depth knowledge on the subject of the various uses of stamps when applied to paper money. Many years later, I was encouraged to update Dr. Keller's work to include the new issues which had appeared in the interim. This effort will be found in the addendum at the end of the article. As your collection grows in size, it is not long before you run across a banknote or two with an adhesive stamp affixed to its surface. Since these notes are not too scarce, indeed some varieties are relatively common, every collector may expect sooner or later to acquire examples for his collection. Therefore, it may be of interest to explore the significance of these stamps. Immediately our attention is drawn to the fact that stamp notes came into issue for a variety of purposes. The most numerous of these notes are those which bear stamps indicating value. Perhaps the stamp-bearing notes most widely known and collected today are those issued by Hungary in 1945. Three varieties of these notes exist: the 1,000 pengo with red stamp affixed, and 10,000 pengo notes with brown or blue stamps affixed to their obverse. These stamps were added to notes in circulation to increase their value. This move was made as an anti-inflation measure. The owners of the notes were required to pay 3/4 of their value and in return received an appropriate stamp to signify this. As an economic move, this measure was doomed to failure, the inflation running on to the astronomical ratio of 1 old pengo to 1 quadrillion new ones. This costly experiment has left to the field of paper money collectors some of our most interesting specimens. The most common examples of stamps affixed to banknotes are those placed there to increase the note's value. A good case in point is Hungary, which experienced rapid inflation in 1945, necessitating the addition of value-added stamps to keep the currency in circulation. Shown here is a 1,000 pengo note with the added stamp. This stamp cost the owner of the note 750 pengo. All notes without stamps then became worthless. Almost equally well known are the stamp notes used in Czechoslovakia after World War II. These notes are of two principal varieties and had their stamps affixed for entirely different reasons. The first of these notes were printed in Russia and were brought into the country for the use of the Russian army. Records ascertaining the amount of these notes issued were improperly kept, and it became necessary to count the notes to determine the quantity then circulating. To accomplish this, each note counted received a stamp. Those circulating without stamps continued to be counted, while stamp-bearing notes were not counted again. Only notes in the denomination of 100, 500 and 1,000 koron were counted. We find on the 100 koron note a blue control stamp picturing the Czechoslovakian statesman Masaryk with a block letter, E, in its lower corners. The stamp itself is overprinted, 100, in black ink. On the 500 koron note we find the same stamp with a red, 500, overprint, and on the 1,000 koron denomination the 1,000 overprint is also in red. The other variety of stamp notes used in Czechoslovakia were the former issues of Slovakia, counted and stamped for the same purpose. After World War II, Czechoslovakia, being recreated as it were, had no banknote issues of its own. As an emergency expedient, the Russian occupation notes mentioned above and the notes of the former state of Slovakia were allowed to circulate side by side until they could be. Two varieties of control stamps used on Czechoslovakian interim notes issued at the close of World War II. The 500 koron note of 1944, above, was an occupation issue of the Red Army, while the Slovakian note below was an issue still circulating at war's end. After receiving control stamps, these notes continued in circulation until they could be replaced with the post-war issue. When being counted, the Slovakian notes received their own stamps. The Slovakian 100 korun note bears a yellow Masaryk stamp with 2K in the lower corners and is without overprinted number. The 500 korun has an orange stamp affixed, bearing the block letter B in its lower corners, and the 1000, a red stamp of greater size with the letter Y, showing Masaryk in profile without cap. The former 500 korun note of Slovakia bore an orange stamp affixed bearing a block letter B in the lower corners, and the 1000 korun a red stamp of greater size with the letter Y, showing Masaryk in profile without cap. Turning the calendar in time to the year 1918, we find another use of stamps on money. At the end of 1918, the defeated Austria-Hungarian Empire disintegrated, re-emerging as several new political units. Among these new countries were Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. Each newly born state developed its own monetary standard. Since banknotes of their own did not exist, Czechoslovakia changed the then circulating Austria-Hungarian notes into their own money by adding a tax stamp for which 1% of the face value was charged. We therefore find blue stamps for 10 halaru on the 10 korun note, red 20 halaru stamps on the 20 kronen denomination, brown 50 halaru on the 50 kronen, and an orange 1 koruna stamp on the 100 kronen issue. For the large 1000 kronen note, no stamp was actually pasted on the note, but rather a printed impression, appearing like a stamp, was printed on the obverse. A large quantity of these stamps were counterfeited, especially in the case of the 20 and 50 halaru stamps and the printed seal on the 1000 kronen issue. In like manner, tax stamps were used in Yugoslavia a year later to create their own money from the old Austria-Hungarian notes. These tax stamps showed no value and only differed in the color used for the different denominations. They exist in 3 distinct issues, with texts in the Slovenian, Croatian and Serbian languages. The Serbian text differs from the others in that it is written in Cyrillic rather than Roman letters. The stamps are found on the denominations of 10, 20, 50, 100 and 1000 kronen, the smaller. The 1 koruna stamp when affixed, after World War I, to this former Austria-Hungary 100 kronen issue, transformed it into Czechoslovakia's first currency. This was an expedient used until banknotes, for the newly formed Republic of Czechoslovakia, could be printed and distributed. The new Czechoslovakian 1000 koruna bank note received a machine stamp authorizing its circulation. In lieu of an adhesive stamp used for all other denominations. In like manner, the newly formed state of Yugoslavia created their own money from existing Austria-Hungarian notes. The tax stamps used on this 1000 kronen note were printed in 3 languages: Slovenian, Croatian and Serbian, thus creating 3 distinct varieties of this note. Denominations having no stamps. Cancellation was usually accomplished by use of a rubber bank seal or date stamp. 40 years later, in 1948, the same motive, a need to change the monetary standard, prompted the authorities in the Soviet-occupied zone of Germany to issue stamps to be placed on the old series of German notes. The Western powers had printed new notes for their sectors of Germany, but Russia had failed to do this. The issue of stamps affixed to the old German notes was meant as a stopgap measure. The stamps were for 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 and 100 mark, each bearing the same value as the banknote to which it was attached. From the very first day of issue, counterfeit stamps appeared on the market. The law provided that only limited amounts of these old notes be validated by the addition of the stamps. Inasmuch as only limited quantities of the old notes could be changed by any one person, a ready market was found for the counterfeit stamps. The stamps could be had for about 1/4 the value of the changed note. This was the primary reason why the monetary standard of the Eastern Zone became depreciated from the beginning. One other example of the use of stamps to authenticate old money until it could be replaced by a new issue is known. On the 7th of March 1946, the Japanese government authorized the use of stamps on their then circulating notes. Stamps were issued for 10, 100, 500 and 1,000 yen. Up to the 500 yen denomination, the notes were revalidated on a 1:1 ratio. Higher amounts were subject to a reduction in value. Stamps for other denominations may exist. These stamped notes then became valid and circulated until new notes were issued to take their place. In at least one instance, the application of stamps to bank notes came about as a result of a fascinating and revolutionary experiment. I refer to the kind of notes which in German are called Schwundgeld, or dwindling money. It was the theory of Silvio Gesell that in the relation of money and goods, the money was the more cherished, and consequently held a better position. He theorized that goods were subject to ruin, consumer goods wear out, clothes go out of fashion, etc., but money always keeps its full value, at least in stable times. Therefore, many people save their money and buy just only what they need. All business would do better, theorized Gesell, if also money would be subject to depreciation. He proposed to introduce money which lost at regular intervals a certain percentage of its value. To accomplish this, the notes would receive supplemental stamps stuck on the note to indicate the depreciation desired. Thus the face value of these notes was intentionally reduced by the addition of a stamp. In all states, the treasuries and competent banks stood against Gesell's theory. Yet Gesell's followers realized his theory, for in several cases it met with success. About the year 1923, there was a mine in the town of Schwanenkirchen which had gone bankrupt and was no longer in operation. Gesell's followers persuaded the miners and the merchants of Schwanenkirchen to accept notes of the Schwundgeld type, and to this they agreed. The mine was activated and the miners paid in Wara notes. Upon being paid their wages, they gave the notes out quickly so as not to lose a percentage to depreciation. This practice was also followed by the merchants. Every man bought for the whole sum of what he had in hand, and by this means business flourished. Gesell's theory was again applied a few years later. In Tyrol, the city of Wurgel was near bankruptcy. Notes of the new type were issued and soon business was flourishing again. There was no unemployment and the city was once again able to execute works long since neglected. From many countries, including the United States, came commissions to explore this miracle. About the same time America had its Black Friday, followed by the severe Depression period. The ideas tried out at Schwanenkirchen and Wurgel were well received, as the time was right for drastic measures. In America the theory was changed considerably from the original idea. You will recall that Gesell's theory called for immediate passing of the notes so that the owner would not lose a percentage to depreciation. Complete depreciation usually took place within 30 days. In America, the theory was changed in such a manner that the note depreciated only when its ownership changed hands. Every time such a note was given as payment, a supplementary stamp would be stuck on the note, usually for 2%. When 52 such stamps were on the note, it was mature and ready for redemption. The issuer of these notes enjoyed a double gain. First, upon redemption, as he was the one who had issued the note, he received its full face value upon its return. Secondly, by selling the supplementary stamps, he gained again the note's entire face. American Depression scrip, note from Fostoria, Ohio with 3 1-cent booster stamps attached. Value plus expenses. When the bearer presented the note for payment, the issuer had to redeem it and pay out its face value, but he had remaining the interest on the whole for 52 weeks. Dwindling money was issued in other countries as well. There existed, and still exist, issues in France, Austria, Sweden and Brazil. From 1933 on through the Depression a great number of issues existed in the United States. I am astonished that these notes are not collected in the United States today. During the 1930s I received some of these notes for my collection, but now since many years, no more. From time to time postage stamps have found their way into use as banknotes. After the First World War, some French colonies issued paper money with postage stamps affixed. This was presumably done to combat a shortage of metal coin. Madagascar used stamps of the Philanzan, type 1908-1917, and the Zebu and Palm, type 1903-1909. These stamps were glued onto thick cardboard and varnished. Many varieties existed. However, the principal values were confined to denominations of 5, 10, 25 and 50 centimes and 1 and 2 francs. The cardboard used varied from gray to brown or yellow. On the Zebu or dog issue we find some notes with the text only in French and some with the values added in the Hova language. Another stamp series, Commerce and Navigation, is known, the 50 centime denomination being intended for circulation only on the island of Moheli. All these pieces are very rare and are no more to be found. They were retired on the 25th of April 1928 after 15 million francs had been issued. The French colony of Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, issued a 1920 series of stamp notes using stamps printed in 1913-1916. These stamps were stuck on thick yellowish paper and were issued in denominations of 5, 10 and 25 centimes. They were overprinted with 2 lines of text, the first being the phrase, valeur d'echange, and the second the value. Individual stamps were separated by a perforation line made with the use of a sewing machine. Issued were 60,000 of the 5 centimes, 50,000 of the 10 centimes and 40,000 in 25 centime pieces. Similar issues of the same denominations were made for the colony of Guinea. The overprinted text appeared in 2 lines as valeur d'echange, and the thick paper used varied between denominations. Orange was used for 5 centimes, green for 10 centimes and red brick for the 25 centime value. A final example of the use of postage stamps for money may be found in the issues of New Caledonia. 4 separate series were issued by the Banque de l'Indochine between 1914 and 1923. The first were not notes at all, but rather round aluminum capsules with enclosed stamps of 25 and 50 centimes of the type, ships before Noumea. The second issue comprised stamps of the same type and value, which were stuck to cardboard containing the overstamped seals of the Trésorier Payeur General and the Administrateur de Nouvelle-Calédonie. Thirdly, followed a similar issue with different stamps for 1 and 2 francs, sailing ship, and a 50 centime piece composed of 35 and 15 centime stamps depicting the Kago bird. The final issue was for 1 and 2 francs only and bore but one seal, that of the Administrateur. The Madagascar stamp money post-World War I 10 centime issue of the Philanzan type. This stamp money issue was necessitated by a severe shortage of coin. Turkey also used stamps stuck on paper as a compensation for the lack of sufficient small coin. The issue was authorized by the law of the 8th of February 1917. This